Well, that was a lovely introduction. Thank you. How many people have been here when I've spoken before? Okay, a couple. So you know that what I like to do is I like to make a presentation, about a half-hour presentation, and then I like to get people to come up on stage who are willing to be vulnerable enough to be walked through a process, so that if they're struggling with something, I'm going to offer you an opportunity to come up here and do that. As always, I think that when you're in a sacred space, whatever happens in here is private, and if somebody wants to talk about what happened to you on stage, I'm going to ask that they get your permission before they repeat the story, because the story belongs to the person that's having the experience. All right? So I'm going to start today. So the theme for this is when we reframe, and reframing is really one of the things that I'm so passionate about, because I've spent my life trying to understand how I could co-create something that was so horrible. So first I'm going to ask, how many people know the difference between victim reality and creator reality? Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about that. Victim reality is what's presently being presented as normal on planet Earth. Victim reality says bad things can happen to you at any time for no reason, out of the blue. How can you trust yourself or the world that you're in if at any moment everything can be taken away from you, or everything can just fall apart, right? And if you look at advertisements, advertisements are based on victim reality. You have no power, you need to buy this product to be safe, you need to pay these people to make you safe, you need to... And so what happens is that we become more and more militarized to try to keep away anything that might harm us or take away what we've spent so much time building. I was first introduced to the idea of co-creation back in the 80s, and it felt right to me. Co-creation says everything that happens to you in your experience. Now, everything that happens to you, not to your neighbor, not to your spouse, to you, has some form of consent from you. You have consented to that. And so I was like, oh, that feels right, but really? Why would I? Because I came from an extremely abusive childhood. Lots of broken bones and trips to the hospital and things like that. And I kept thinking, why would I co-create those kinds of experiences, especially as a child? What, am I a masochist? So I was really struggled with that throughout the 80s. Like, how do I find what the co-creation part of that is? I was a great victim. I can tell you, I could tell a story and in 3 seconds have people weeping for me. And so I played that card for a long time because it worked for me. I was a good victim. But I was so frustrated being a victim because I felt powerless. I'm like, I don't like that story. That story takes all the power away from me and puts it in the hands of the people who abused me. So how can I change that story? So I just began noodling on co-creation like every single day. I thought about it, I wrote about it, I meditated on it. And finally, as I began to work it with my emotional intelligence work, I realized something. Patterns. Patterns are the thing that you have to look for, right? Patterns, so co-creation is, as I said, the experience that you are creating your reality. You're creating your experience, right? Okay, so why would I create trauma and pain? This was really fascinating to me. Then I learned about imprinting. Imprinting is from ages birth to 7. As a child, you are the most susceptible to what you're going to believe throughout your life. So you are imprinted. Even in the womb, you will be imprinted. If your mother had a labor where she was afraid of not having enough resources, she was isolated and alone, she had to scrimp and save, then chances are that child's going to come out with an imprint that there's never going to be enough. Okay? And then you come out into the world and see, she's already getting what she came for. And then you come out in the world, and then you're bombarded with imprints from your religious institutions, from your teachers, from your peers, from your parents, from your family, from television, right? My generation was the first generation that actually had television, and we were glued to that thing. And so every one of those commercials went right in and imprinted us, right? So now you've got all these conflicting belief systems that are living in your psyche. And now you get to an age where you're starting to make your own decisions, and you're like, no, I don't want to do life this way. I want to do life this way. And so you start doing life this way, and boom, you run into something. There's that victim thing, like, oh my God, every time I step in this direction, I get smacked down. Why do you get smacked down? Because that's your pattern. The pattern says there's a belief system in your way, and you're going to keep banging into it until you figure it out, right? So, I have to look at my cards. Okay, so how will you know what's in your unconscious if you're unconscious of it? That's really the big question, right? How do you know what your belief systems are if you don't know what they are? So when I was first starting the work that I do, I was introduced to this book called The Right Use of Will by Cian de Rohan. Has anybody heard of that book or read it? I highly recommend it. And that book shook up everything for me. It made me question every single belief I had. Like, I literally spent probably 5 years writing in a journal every single day what I thought I believed, and then looking to see if I was actually living that in my life. And it was amazing for me to see that the image I had of myself and how I presented to the world was not at all how other people were seeing me based on what my actions were. My actions were so far from what I thought I believed that I was seriously confused, but also really upset with myself. I'm like, how can you say this and go, and it's like, no wonder people don't trust you to keep your word, because you have this big gap between what you say and what you do, what you say and what you do, what you say and what you do. So I started looking at those patterns. First of all, what am I saying? What do I think I believe? And then how am I acting? And often what I would find is that my actions were showing me that I was behaving from an old belief system I didn't even know I had, or one that I thought I had rejected. So my actions were very clearly showing me the truth of what I was believing. Even though I thought my intellectual mind was full of research and full of things and full of all this spiritual stuff I'd been studying and doing and workshops I'd been attending, and I'd come home, so high from a weekend retreat somewhere and be like, yes! And then, boom, right away back into the same old stuff. And so this writing things out really helped me to see that I was still stuck. There were places in me that were really believing in these old imprints, and they were stuck there, and until I did something, they were not going to change. Okay, so that brings me to the next part of how can we know what we're unconscious of until we're conscious of it. How do we know? How do we get from unconscious to conscious about something? And that's where patterns come in. People that we are in relationship are our best mirrors for our patterns and for our imprints. And so this was a challenge for me to go back and say, what if I change the story like this? Now, how many people here know about sacred agreements, have heard about them or know about them? Okay, it's not a new concept. It's been around for a while. I think Carolyn Mace talks about it quite a bit. So the idea of a sacred agreement is this. This is my way of telling it to myself. I like simple stories. I like to engage the child part of myself, so my stories have become simpler and simpler and simpler the older I get. So this is my sacred agreement story. We're all hanging out in a room together, planning our trip to Earth, our next incarnation to Earth. And I'm with my soul tribe, and we're like, we're going down. We're going to go down in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, because that's when all this stuff's going to happen, and we need to be there because we got something to bring, and we're taking this on. And we all know that we're going to go unconscious when we get here, right? So it's like we have to make an agreement. I'm going to agree to find you when you most need me to show you what you're holding that's not serving you. I'm going to come into your life, and I'm going to be the biggest pain in your ass until you get the message. until you understand what I'm here to reflect to you. And then maybe I'll never see you again. Maybe that'll be the end of our relationship. Or maybe we'll go on to be great friends and we'll stay in our little soul group for the rest of our lives. So that's the story I started telling myself. So then I went, well, okay, what about if all these horrible relationships from my past were really sacred agreements? What would the sacred agreement be if I go back and say, if I reframe that abuse and say, what was that person trying to show me? And you know what? It made sense. Everything started to fall into place. They did this because I carried a belief that said this, and I carried that belief in with me because I was way too young to even get that. That belief came with me. So they did this to show me, even though at that age I couldn't really understand it consciously, I was able to, as I got older, make sense of it. And so I went back through my life and I started reframing all of my worst experiences, and that in and of itself is a really hard thing to do, because I had to relive a lot of those feelings. I've been journaling since I was 16, which is a good thing because it's kept me honest. There are so many things in my journals that I'd be like, who wrote this? I did not write this. And yet there it is, black and white, in my own handwriting, my many different handwritings. It's funny because different parts of me write in different ways. I'm a big believer in the concept. In my work, I work in a system that's based on the Chinese 5-element tradition, and in my work, you have 5 distinct personalities. And each personality is responsible for a different part of your life. And when they are working together as a community, you have absolute power to create the life that you choose. When they're not working together, you're going to have self-sabotage. And so I have a book that I've been working on for 20 years, and I'm finally at the end. And I'm hoping to have it at the publisher by the end of the summer. And so this book will explain a lot of this, like what are the 5 personalities that we all have? Which one do I prefer to move forward in life with? Because we all have one we like the best. And how do I get them to work together as a community? Okay? And so a lot of times what I found is that when I go to address a relationship issue and I'm afraid to address it directly with the person, because I'm unsure that either one of us are in a space where we can walk through from co-creators. That's always my question with people when I'm having an issue and they want to have resolution. I say, can we talk about this from the aspect of co-creation? One time I was in Mexico with a friend of mine and we had this big fight. And it was a fight because I had acted completely out of character. I did something that so I felt shame because I was acting out of character, and I was confused because why would I do that? And I was angry at myself. And then she was angry at me, and she kept saying, why would you do that to me? Why would you do something to me that I would never do to you? I don't understand how people can do things to other people that they wouldn't want done to them. And as I listened to her, I found myself getting more and more angry. And I know to listen to my anger. So I said to my anger, what's up? And my anger said, she's asking the wrong question. If you try to answer that question, she's a victim and you're a victimizer. And I said to her, you're asking me the wrong question. That question, it makes me the victimizer and you the victim. It would be easier for me if you would say, if we could say, why do we think we co-created this experience together? And she went, oh my God, why do you think we co-created this experience together? And and within 5 minutes, we had uncovered like years of this pattern that had come to a head at that moment. And that fight that we had was an opportunity for us to reflect to each other what was out of balance. And because we took advantage of it, we were able to have resolution. So I refuse to have arguments or conversations about resolution with people who cannot speak from a place of co-creation. But I have learned that I can have resolution with them by myself. And that's part of my work with emotion, is that I've learned that anger is my power. Anger is my warrior energy. So when I'm angry, I have a process that I go through of doing rage work. Did you know that your body's hardwired to hit when you're angry? It literally is hardwired to hit, to strike, which is why you see children strike out when they're angry, right? And so what I've learned is if I don't repress that, if I instead go into it, create a sacred space, I have these rage dolls, pick up a rage doll and just, scream and beat it, my anger transforms. It goes through the cycle, transforms, and all of a sudden the truth comes into me. And as the truth settles into me, I am no longer angry. I realize my part of the co-creation. Anger gives me the ownership of how I was co-creating when I do it with sacred intent. When I'm driving down the road screaming, that's not so that's not so productive. When I have road rage, that's not productive. So I've learned to do my anger in a sacred space with the intention that I want to know what my anger is trying to tell me about this situation. What is this anger trying to tell me about this relationship? What is this anger trying to tell me about this person? Or really, what is this anger trying to show me that I'm projecting on the other person or seeing my own reflection on the other person of some belief system that's not serving me, that needs to go? And so I've been able to do this work alone, and all of a sudden, there's no issue with the person. Like, they don't even have to be involved in it. I can just do it, come to my own realization, and it's like suddenly we're occupying a different reality. They might not even remember that we were in conflict. That's how powerful emotional energy moves through the collective. There's only one emotional body on this planet, and we all share it. So if you think about that, one of the reasons I'm really pro-anger work is the more you repress anger, the more it looks for expression. And who's expressing anger the best? Soldiers, gangs, police. Because anger will go wherever it's received, right? And so when I first started doing this work with anger, and by the way, all the information I got from anger, I got from two places. Fires. I'd sit out at my cabin in front of a fire, and the fire would just give me. I'd be sitting there with my notebook, trying to see, writing everything down, and a 3-year-old. A 3-year-old showed me what moving anger through your body looks like and feels like. And I took notes the whole week I was with her. It was amazing to watch her. She'd stand there, and it was like a steam engine. Like, you could see the clouds of steam coming out of her ears as she'd shriek at the top of her lungs. And it made her parents super uncomfortable, and they were always trying to bank her down, right? So they had to leave for a week, and they're like, oh my God, can you take care of her? And I was like, of course, I'm here, I'm staying in your house, I'll take. So I just followed her around, and then I'd watch her do this. She'd get frustrated because something would fall or break, or she'd be building something, it would crash. And she'd just stand and do that thing where she'd scream at the top of her lungs. And then she'd just stop and go back to what she was doing. And one day I said to her, Soleil, what were you mad about? And she goes, what? Like, it was so completely out of her field, she didn't even know what I was talking about. It was gone. And so I realized that the power that letting my anger come out without any judgment, not only did I realize how powerful that was, but I loved how it made me feel afterwards, because it made me feel like a creator. It made me feel like I had power to create the kind of life that I was choosing. Now, the other thing was, as soon as I started to do that, all of my anger from so many years that had been probably out there bobbling around went, hey, let's go home. And I had so much conflict for like that first 2 or 3 years that I was working with anger. So just a little heads up, if you're going to work with your anger, be prepared for it to come in. And what I like to do when I set up my intention is, my intent is to feel and express my anger in a sacred way. My intent is to own my anger, and my intent is to only take on as much as I'm capable of handling right now. And then that gives a structure for my anger to come through. And so nonverbal expression. I don't know why I got into anger. This was not on my thing. So clearly someone here is needing to hear this. Anyway, so where am I going? I'll look at my notes. Okay, back to sacred agreements. Okay, how many people have somebody in their life that they've had a fight with and never made up? How many people would like to have resolution with that relationship? All right. I know, and there is some of this. Resolution to me does not necessarily mean you have to be back in a physical relationship with them. It just means that there's no charge. I always know I have a charge about something if I wince when I think about it. I'm a wincer. I'll be driving and some thought will come in. I'll be like, no, I'm not thinking about that. No, that's my wincer. And that means that that's where I have to do some work. Like wincing is where my work is. So I have to build up my courage to go and confront that wince and start to do the work. What I have learned, though, is, again, about using your rage work or your... So I have a worksheet. Had I thought I was going in this direction, I would have brought and handed it out to you all. However, you can email me. My email address is on the paper, and I'd be happy to send you the worksheet. And the worksheet simply says this: I am upset about blank. And you just jot a word in. It can be somebody's name. It can be losing my job. It can be my car broke down. Whatever it is, you just put a little thing in there. And then it says, my fear says, my anger says, my guilt says, my hurt says, my judgment says, or something like that. There's like 5 or 6 little boxes. And I just go through, first, what does my fear say? What does my anger say? What does my grief say? What does my guilt say? And I just work all of my emotions around that particular issue. And sometimes I'll come to clarity just by filling out that worksheet. And I do this sometimes in the car. I'll just be sitting at a stoplight. I'm like, why are you so angry all of a sudden? And then I'll just go, my anger says. And when I first started the worksheet, before I learned conscious language, the worksheet said, I am angry because. And then I took a conscious language workshop, and I learned that I am is a decree to the universe. I am. And I'm like, ooh, I don't want to decree that I'm angry. So that's when I learned that if I said, my anger says, it allowed me to step back and be an observer as well as a participant. So what it did is it put me in the position of listening to my anger, being an active listener. Rather than being angry, I got to step back and say to my anger, why are you so angry? Well, and sometimes, I'll tell you this, sometimes the first things out of your mouth are not going to be attractive or nice. And that's why you have that sacred space. The sacred space is the idea that nothing leaves your energetic bubble. Repressed anger will eventually leave your field and go looking for expression. And because it always comes back, that's when it comes back as something unexpected and traumatic. And that's why we feel like we've been victimized, right? That's how our anger comes back to us. So rather than repress it and wait for it to go out and come back to us in a harmful manner, if we set up a space ahead of time and say, I'm going to give my anger permission to express itself right here with the intention that it stays with me and transforms. And anger will always take you to an aha moment. When you reach the end of that particular batch of anger, it's going to give you a gift. And the gift is usually, duh. Now I get it. It's that aha moment the hours of anger are 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. So I often get that 2 o'clock in the morning, ding! Oh that's what that's about. Right? How many people ever get woken up between those hours with, yeah, that's your anger, like, I've got something for you. So that's how you can transform your anger and make it work for you, okay? Own your emotional body. It's the most powerful thing that you have. It really is the thing that makes magic real in 3 dimensions, is emotion. And that's why I'm so fascinated with it. Because my first journal entries as a child were, I don't want to live in a world where there's no magic. I was a sad child, and I didn't want to live in a world that didn't have magic in it. So I've learned how to create magic, and I've learned how to find magic. So now we're going to go back to sacred agreements. I would like to know if anybody would be willing to come up and walk through a relationship that they have, don't have a resolution with, that they still have some pain about, if they'd be willing to walk through the reframing of it so that we can find what the sacred agreement might have been. Is there anybody willing to do that? Oh, you're missing out a good opportunity. No? All right, well, there goes 15 minutes of my, of my talk. Please, thank you. Oh, let's give her a hand. What's your name?
My name is Cindy.
Cindy, nice to meet you. Okay, so tell me an experience or something that's been traumatic for you that you...
Okay. Well, this has been going on the majority of my life because I have a stepmother, okay? My mother died when I was 2.5 months old, and then my dad remarried. Oh, thank you.
There you go.
Okay. My mother died when I was 2.5 months old. My dad remarried when I was almost a year. I've been staying with my aunt and uncle up until then. At that point, my stepmother, she was very jealous of my mother's memory. And there were 2 older brothers that came from that same family. And then again, she went on to have more children. So there was a total of 7 of us, which was all good. What's been going on over the years was we were the stupid ones, and hers were the only ones who were smart. Okay, and there's a lot that goes with the background. We don't have that much time. So going through the years, believing that you're stupid, even though you're not, you find out later on you really aren't, but you're always, when you're in that home, you are less than that, and so are your older brothers. You are less than the other ones. Okay, as it proceeds on, what I learned to do, how to cope with that was, I don't know if I can do you remember Columbo? Remember how Columbo was? He always went on, I started taking on his character without them realizing that, because it was a way in which to deal with it. And so I did that. And then as the years went on, a lot of my siblings still think of me that way, even though I don't express myself that way. It wasn't until about, when was it? About 2002, I moved up to the North Shore, and I decided I am going to be myself. No more of this stuff. I'm going to be myself. And so when I went into my employment, I went into everything. From then on, I was Cindy. But it takes a little while to step into that, but whenever I get back together with them, well, you know how it is when you try to go, you
Yes.
are still that person.
Yes.
You're not the person you became.
Yes.
You're something else. And over the years, I have learned that you are not the person you were even 2 years ago. You're not even the same person you were a year ago or 6 months ago. You're changing and evolving all the time. So I have been working on this. So it makes it easier for me to come up here.
Okay,
And
great.
then since then, I've been... Okay.
You have given, okay, I'm going to have you sit and keep the microphone in case I have to ask you anything. Thank you, Cindy, for coming. Okay. How many people saw all the layers of belief systems coming up from the minute she said, my mother died when I was 2.5 months old? Okay. What imprint do you think that gave you?
Oh... Maybe the pity Cindy because she
Nope.
was from... Nope,
Nope.
that. Oh, it wasn't that.
The most important nurturing I will ever receive will abandon me.
Oh, okay.
The most important nurturer in my life will abandon me. Has that been a pattern for you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you can see how something that happens when you're still even pre-verbal can set you up for a lifetime of patterns, right? Now, how is she ever going to know that she believes that the nurturer is going to abandon her unless somebody rubs it in her face over and over and over and over again.
I do it to myself.
Well, and what I would say is that your stepmother, if you have a sacred agreement with your stepmother, sacred agreements are made on the heart level. So even when we are in somebody's life causing them great pain, it hurts us. We may not recognize that hurt in the moment because we're in our 3D brain, which is thinking about things like, which is more ego-based, right? We're not thinking really with our heart. But there is a part of us that feels that pain. And I will tell you this, when somebody that you have a sacred agreement with comes into your life to deliberately hurt you, to help you see an imprint, and you don't get it, and they have to keep hurting you, they get mad. They get mad at you. They want you to get it so that you will set boundaries with them and say, I got it, I understand, that's not going to be acceptable anymore. And then they're like, phew, thank you. I've had this experience on both ends in my life. I've had the experience of being the person who was hurting other people, and I've had the experience of being hurt by other people. And when I've gotten to that place where it's like, all of a sudden, that dynamic has changed, and the sacred agreement becomes very aware in my head or in my heart, or I become aware of it. They may not, and that doesn't matter. It's not about them becoming aware. It's about me becoming aware. Once I'm aware of the sacred agreement, that behavior stops. There's no place in my reality for it anymore because that vibration is gone. There's no Velcro for them to snatch onto. Okay? So think of people who hurt you as they're one side of the Velcro and you have a piece in you that continues to attract them to you. And they get stuck there. And when you can turn yourself from Velcro to Teflon, Teflon is when you have your sacred agreement awareness and you go, oh, that's what they're trying to show me. So the other thing that I heard you say is, this is the imprint. And this one you may have come in with. I am not as valuable as the people around me.
Yes, it does. It does go into that I'm not worthy thing.
Okay.
I'm not, and
I've been working on that. That's where your stepmother came in on the sacred agreement and said, this is hurting you. I'm going to show you from the minute I come into your life, I'm going to show you that this is what you're carrying with you until you decide to say no to it. Okay? All right. Now, because this has been something that's been deeply embedded in your psyche since you were a baby and possibly even before you came, I'm going to suggest that you do some emotional work around this issue before the next time that you meet with your stepmother. And so I'm going to encourage you to do some rage work. I'm going to encourage you to get a pillow or something that you can hit. Don't take anything hard because you don't want to hurt yourself. But, something that you can hit, or big boxes are fun to kick around. That's another great way. Your body's, it just wants to strike out at something and hit and feel it hit something. So some people don't like rage dolls because they're too soft. Some people like to break things. So I had a woman who had a 13-year-old son, and we managed to get him a friend of mine brought over like 20 pieces of big heavy glass like this, and she's like, I found this outside the dumpster and I thought you might want it. And I was like, what? And an hour later, a client showed up and she's like, my 13-year-old son is so angry, he's being bullied at school, he's so frustrated, and he really needs to do some anger work, but he doesn't like to use the doll, he wants to break something. And I was like, ding, 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 ding. So I sent her home with the 20 pieces of glass. We made up a structure. He got to do it in the basement. He had to wear safety glasses and gloves. She gave him I don't know if he took a baseball or a rock or whatever, but he set up each of those 20 pieces very carefully, gave them each a name. She said, and I heard my name. And then he broke the glass, cleaned everything up, and he never, ever had to do anger work again. That was enough for him. He's now a very successful comedian. Yeah, that's the power of really giving yourself permission to rage in a sacred way. And so what I'm going to suggest is that before you see your stepmother, you give yourself at least 3 to 5 sessions where you just, and again, because it's in here, you can call them any name you want. You can scream at them. You can tell them what a jerk they are. You can swear at them because it's not leaving your field. It's here to be transformed through the acting out of it in a sacred manner with the conscious intention of getting to the place where you see the sacred agreement and you can find compassion. That's your end result, is you always come to a place of compassion. And people think compassion, I think that people think that compassion is a weak emotion. That if you're compassionate, you're kind of a pushover. I will tell you that true compassion comes from balanced anger. Balanced anger is never angry. Balanced anger is the warrior and cannot be pushed off of that position. And that position always comes from the heart. But it's like, nope, this is not going to happen anymore. I love myself too much, and I love you too much for this to continue to go on. Does that feel right to you?
Well, yeah. Part of that was conditioning so that I was never allowed to be mad. So I get sad instead of mad, and I go into deep sadness sometimes. Yeah, that can happen. And
that's a part of this is part of our racial evolution right now. Is feminine anger has got to come into balance. Feminine anger, when it's balanced, is beautiful, and it's so powerful. And we're terrified of it because we've all been on the receiving end of imbalanced anger. Everybody has been on the receiving end of imbalanced anger, and probably most of us have been on the giving end of imbalanced anger too, right? So it's not unusual that we're frightened of our anger. I will tell you that anger is your best friend. When it's balanced and it's living in you as a compassionate warrior, your life will change. You will feel protected, you will feel safe, you will be able to trust, and you'll be able to relax into your life. And when you are in a place of strong compassion, grace, that's when grace comes in. And grace is miraculous. Grace is magic. Grace goes, you know what? You've been on this channel 11 for your whole life. We're switching you over to channel 6 because it's really fun over here. And all of a sudden, nothing in your life looks different, but everything in your life feels different. Okay? Does anybody have any questions at this point? Yes? The right use of will. The right use of will. And do not be, be prepared. You may only be able to read one page at a time and then take a week to think about it. It's that kind of book. So, yes? Yes, I think that it is safe as long as you're not doing anything to harm the baby. And that brings, I have a little story that my friend told me I could share. I had a friend who had a baby. She called me up one day. I hear the baby in the background, and finally I'm like, what's wrong with your daughter? She said, oh, she's just been like this all day. I can't get her to stop. I've tried everything, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, are you and your husband having, are you fighting with your husband? Yes. I said, how come you're not doing your rage work? Well, I didn't want to disturb the baby. And I go, the baby's already doing the rage work. Like, you need to disturb the baby's not going to be disturbed if you're not directing it at her. She called me 15 minutes later, and she's like, okay, you can talk about this in your workshops. She's like, I picked up that rage doll and started doing the rage work, and the baby went, and went right to sleep. And that's why you see babies on planes who are so fussy, because people are so angry that the baby's fussy. Right? Okay, so just make sure that however you're doing it, it's not going to harm, So if I were pregnant, I'd probably do it in a chair. I'd sit in a chair and just take a doll and hit like a doorway. Because you can still do the striking out, but you're not putting any pressure on your... Any other questions? Yes?
What could you do in that situation, like if you were on a plane?
What I do when I'm on a plane and I see that happen is that I immediately close my eyes and I go to that baby and I surround the baby with amethyst light, and I imagine holding it, and I'm like, bring it to me. I can handle it. I'll take it. And I tell you that babies go to sleep.
Well, I mean, what could you do to actually, like if your baby and you were holding in this anger, like you and your spouse or whatever had just had a fight, the baby's picking up on that and expressing that anger. What could you do to actually go to the core of the anger on the plane, because you can't act out there?
No, you can't act out on the plane. However, and thank you for that question. However, if I was a parent who had this awareness, I did not have this awareness when I was a parent. I was a terrible parent in terms of emotional expression. I was just like, bleh! Now, though, what I understand is if it were me holding, it would have to be somebody else's baby, but let's say I was holding somebody else's baby and they started fussing, I would look to find a way to to bring inner peace to myself. And one of the things I would do is I would tell the baby telepathically, whatever it is you're feeling, give it to me. I'll do it. I'll do it. If you're, and that's the other thing I do when I'm around babies who are fussy. I say to them, if you are doing any of this work for me, please don't. Please let me have it back. It's not your job. Any other questions? Yes?
So, I feel like I don't have a lot of anger and I'm using forgiveness. Is that me stuffing the anger?
Can you say your question again?
I feel like I don't have a lot of anger and I am using forgiveness on the people that I'm angry with. Is that avoiding that anger?
Forgiveness is such a tricky word because it's tied to so many religious structures. Here's what I think. Forgiveness comes from victim-victimizer reality. I can choose, because you victimize me, I can choose to forgive you or not forgive you. That gives me some power in the situation, right? Mm-hmm. Co-creation says, I see how we created this together. There's no need for forgiveness because you understand both of your parts of it. It's acceptance. So in the work that I was first taught, they kept saying, instead of forgiveness, they kept saying acceptance. And I'm like, what? I don't get that. And now I do. Now I understand that acceptance is because I'm owning my part of that. There's nothing to forgive. Forgiveness implies that something was done to me without my permission. And I don't give my permission for anything to be done to me without my cooperation. Even if I don't know why I'm cooperating, I believe that I'm cooperating, and that makes me stand in a place of power. Does that help?
So that means I need to go home and address this person with anger.
You can do it by yourself. Don't do it to them. Don't do it to them.
Okay.
Don't do it with them.
Do it.
Where do you get the rage dolls?
Well,
how do I do it by myself?
I actually have somebody making some more for me because I sold all of them out. So check my website in like a month, and hopefully I'll have some for sale. But really, you can just take like a long, heavy pillow or something. But I'm serious about not taking your anger to another person. As long as you're angry, you're in reaction. Angry anger always needs to be right. That's why I don't argue with people when we're angry. That's why Facebook is a terrible venue for expressing anger, because everybody needs to be right when they're angry. So what you need to do is give your anger permission to be right, which they can't do with the other person present, right? You do it with yourself, and you do it with rage work, and you let yourself be right, and eventually that process of letting your anger be right, so it's not fighting you. Right now your anger's fighting you because it doesn't want to forgive. It wants to be powerful. And so if you give it permission to tell you exactly what it needs to tell you, and you hear it, that anger is going to transform into power, and there won't be any anger. You'll know when you're done. You'll know when you're done because you won't be angry.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Do we need to stop for the offering yet?
One more.
One more. Okay, great.
Can you tell us your website?
Yes, it should be. It's emotionaltechnologies.com. You're welcome. It's not on there? Oh, bad me. Okay, yes.
Okay. My question is, if the person you're angry with is vulnerable in some way, either they're sick or aged or whatever, how do you give yourself permission to be angry when you feel bad about the situation that they're in?
So this is a typical experience for women. Women are the caretakers generally, and they've been trained to be compassionate. And how can you be angry at somebody when they're sick or they're not doing well? And what I will tell you is that your anger is not about them. They're helping to trigger you for some reason. So my guess is that if you could find a way to go and do your anger about them, Remember that if it's in your bubble, it can be anything. You can say and think the worst, you can speak out the worst possible things because somebody in the world is already doing that. So why don't we just bring it home, speak out the worst possible thing? Like maybe the worst possible thing you could say is, I wish you were dead so I didn't have to take care of you. How horrifying is that as a compassionate person to say that? But when you're doing rage work, if you're able to put that into that sacred space and transform it so that you can hear what that person's neediness is triggering you. It's just a trigger. It's a trigger for your anger that's not about them. Possibly. Might be about them, but it's not going to be about them being sick. It might be something else. But my guess is it's not even about that. It's just that sacred agreements are like, I can see that you're struggling. I can see you're mad about something. I'm going to really just get in there and just give you a little dig. And see if I can just make you explode. So rage work to me is controlled demolition. Right? My life was a series of explosions where everything that I had built up just crashed to the ground because of my own crazy actions when I would explode. So I learned how to do controlled demolition, and now I don't have those things happen anymore. Now I trust myself, and I trust my life. All right. Yes? I'm going to show up in your life when you're struggling with something that you don't understand, and I'm going to push your buttons until you get it, until you do the work to understand. So if I see that you're angry, I'm going to come and push your buttons until you understand what your anger is about. If I see that you're repeating old patterns over and over again and you're being unconscious about them and denying them, I'm going to come in and I'm going to push your buttons even harder. Until you see that, that's why rage work is so powerful, because it helps you see things you'll never see with your logical brain. Emotion just bypasses the brain and goes right to the heart and goes, here's the truth. Here's what it is. The agreement is with who's ever pushing your buttons. After we do the offering, I'm going to have us circle up, and we're going to do just a little energy exercise. And so I think that we're just about ready to do the offering. Is that right? So I want to thank you all for coming. You're a great audience. Thank you so much for coming up and being vulnerable for us.
Thank you, Kat Thompson.
But we're not going to hold hands. But we're going to do something a little different. So I think let's spread out so we get the back of the room too. So you want to have probably a little bit of length between you and the person next to you. Not too much, but enough. So you're going to put your left palm up and your right palm down. You're going to leave your left palm where it is, and you're going to take your right palm and you're going to go over your neighbor's. You need to put your hand over here. So you're going to take your right palm and you're going to scan on top of your neighbor's left palm until you feel an energy connection. And you'll feel it snap in. Everybody feeling that? Energy comes in our body on the left and leaves our body on the right. So let's imagine now we're starting a circle of this energy. It's going around the circle from left to right. And as it's coming in your left palm, it's moving through your heart. And each one of us is going to add just a little drop of compassion and pass it out through our right hand. And so you can follow the energy around the room. And every time it comes back around to your heart, add a little drop of compassion and send it out. And let's just build up a nice little vortex here. Okay, so we've got this beautiful vortex of energy, which we're just going to keep right here and let continue to spin and spin and spin and spread out into the neighborhood here. But we're going to each take a little bit of this for ourselves. So on our inhale, we're going to bring our hands to like we're holding a ball. And on the exhale, just kind of feel what size your ball is. Is it a baseball? Is it a basketball? Is it a soccer ball? How big is that energy for you? So this ball of energy has everyone in this room's compassion. So we're going to take a big inhale, and on the exhale, you're going to just smear it all over your heart. So inhale, and exhale, and let yourself just receive all of that beautiful compassion that just came around that circle. And the rest of it, you can see it all. It's just spinning here and spinning here and spinning here, and it's going to just keep spreading out into the community and affecting change. So thank you all very much. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day.